I'm continuing on my chaotic chronicling of June. It has been a weird month, lots of reading, lots of non-reading. So for the last several months, I have been watching the playoffs. I am being a hockey fan my entire life. I was born into the Ottawa Senators, of course, where I'm from. They've not done well for a very long time, and I still stay faithful, but it's very fun. Playoff season is like the best season. And if it goes well, it lasts months. So last year I started celebrating with my friend from Edmonton who supports the Edmonton Oilers, and that has been very fun. They made it to 2 rounds last year and it was great, and this year, despite all the odds, made it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. And this tonight is the possibility for the first time in 31 years for a Canadian team to win. It is Canadian original sport, and yet because many of the dumb franchise things and the commissions thinking that it's wealthier to expand American teams and to block Canadian teams from being built, we end up with very few Canadian teams in the league, which makes it very difficult to win. But alas, we have an opportunity and it is amazing. It is best of 4 games, and we lost the first 3 and we've come back and landslided the next 3. So I'm hoping that it will not be a stressful game and we will win fast and we will celebrate. It's going to be amazing. So as you know, hockey, I brought Beartown, which is also just a book I really love, and also a book that is shared between me and my friend who love this team, so that's really great. And yeah, other than that, I've mostly been reading classics. I got a little bit of Jane Austen July early. I read Sense and Sensibility, which was great. I read it for the first time in 2021 and I loved it, and this time I reread it on audio and it was just so interesting to read and I just loved it so much. And then I read Persuasion. This is the 4th time I read Persuasion and it's by far my most read of Austen's works, but it's just so good and I love the story. And yeah, I'm hoping to read Mansfield Park in July, and then I don't know, I kind of want to read them all close together to like kind of think, because I love parts of them so differently and it's very hard for me to figure out which ones I actually like best in the end. So yeah, it's going to be exciting. I also crossed off my 1924 pick for 100 Years, and also 100 years ago with A Passage to India. I'd previously read E.M. Forster's book A Room with a View and I really liked it. It was very funny, the characters were great, and this book had its moments, but it failed mostly for me. It is a book that really does blatantly look at racism, especially microaggressions, because these women have gone over to India. One of them is prospectively going to marry a man and she kind of wants to see him in his environment. They befriend an Indian doctor and relationships are tricky. There's also another guy who's a school teacher and he has a relationship, and like the idea that Indian and white people were friends in this era was like something that was scandalous. And yet you can see that and look back and be like, oh, it's great that, you know, he was looking at these things and he was calling out the really racist things that white people did in India. And yet it still is really mystified, especially since a lot of the book is told through Dr. Aziz's point of view. And you really just have this man who's like perplexed by his own culture. And it's just like, you can tell a white man is writing this, you know, and yeah, it's like if I was like really surprised about how hot it is right now, you know, because it's Canada and like there's this cultural assumption that Canada is cold, even though it is so hot for at least 4 months of the year. And we've had heat warnings all week and it's crazy. It's like 34 degrees, which I looked up, which is about 95 Fahrenheit. So it's been hot and humid. But like, I'm not going to really think that's strange because I've grown up my entire life with both really cold winters and really hot summers, and that's always been the life. My step cousins once came from California and they didn't believe my uncle when he said you need to bring shorts and t-shirts, and they brought sweaters and they thought that he was lying, and they spent a very hot August with it 35 to 40 degrees and just dying and being like, why didn't we buy shorts and t-shirts to bring? But yeah, it's just one of those cultures where it's like, this is a man who's, you know, his culture is being infringed by British rule, but like he doesn't feel like a person outside of the conversation of how colonialism affects him. You know, it doesn't feel like he's a real character, so you don't really feel that closeness. I didn't feel compelled. It took me a while to read because I just didn't want to read it, which his last book I read in one sitting because I couldn't get enough of it. So it's very interesting. I want to read more of his books. And then last night I couldn't sleep, so I was like, I'm going to start a graphic novel. I started Mouse by Art Spiegelman, and this is really good. It starts about 5-6 years before the Holocaust begins, and it's just narrating this guy's life as, you know, he meets his wife and all of those things, and there's some themes that I didn't even realize are in it, and I'm so excited. I only own the first one, so I requested a second book from the library. I'm really excited to read these, and yeah, hopefully I will be very happy in a few hours when it is dark and I feel only pain. That was a brutal game and it came so close to the wire and it was so hard to see them. We had 20 people and we were very loud and very cheery. And we did not win. It was very, very sad. I finished the first book of Mouse and it is so good. I loved it. I feel like I'm always pronouncing it wrong, but who knows. I've also started Hedda Gabler by Henrik Ibsen. He's an 1800s playwright that I really enjoyed The Dollhouse from. And I'm seeing this in Stratford in August and I'm so excited. So I'm hoping this is wonderful. This is also my shirt that I would like to say is my Parisian look. It's like oversized and whatever, but it's like, yes, I am a woman who, like Marie Antoinette, wants to lounge and be a shepherdess. I don't know if that's the exact vibe. I don't know the exact vibe that I'm going for, but it's a vibe in some way. I'm also really enjoying musical theater. I am listening to a lot of Merrily We Go Around. I'm listening to a lot of The Great Comet, which has been Lawn, one of my favorites. I definitely go through different moods and different, especially musical moods, and this is a mood of the musical theater. And I'm also listening to a lot of Big Spender, and All That Jazz is what was playing right before this. It's a delightful. I love summer. Summer is great. Hello, so I'm going to wrap up this semi-June vlog where I read some books. I want to discuss them. I bought some books. It's going to be very exciting, and yeah, I wanted to be more organized this month, but I wasn't. So we can hope that July gets me back on track, and if not, we'll continue on this chaotic thing. First of all, I want to talk about Hedda Gabler. I finished it, and I have a lot of thoughts. I'm going to see it in September. I thought August, but it's September 5th is when I'm going to see it at Stratford. And I feel like having it performed will have some things, because I really, really love A Dollhouse, which is a play that came out 11 years before this. And they're both focused on characters that are constrained by their marriages and are very unhappy. But Hedda and Nora are like opposite characters in so many ways. And I really like A Dollhouse, and I wonder if Hedda is a little bit more like reactionary to who Nora is, which is really interesting. And I'm really excited to see it performed. I liked it a lot. He's brilliant with just having these characters easily become characters. And then also his dialogue, it's so funny. It's translated. He was originally writing it in Norwegian, but like, it's cool. It's wonderful. I really like his story. Yeah, it follows this woman who is just recently married. She was very fancy around town, and now she's realizing as she gets older that she has to go into a marriage. She's married this man who's an academic who bores her a lot, and she is not that exhilarated by him, and she wants to live this luxurious life and kind of settle into the wealth of being a married woman without the privileges. So we have like The Great Comet, which I love, one of my favorite musicals of all time. I mentioned earlier, it's taken from part of The Great Comet, and it's not necessarily that she wants to have an affair, but I really love and appreciate the song in the duel in which they just shout from the chorus, "Here's to married women and their lovers." And then at one point, someone is contemplating whether they want to try to convince a woman to break her engagement. And they're like, dude, just wait till she's married and you can have as much fun as you want. So that's kind of what Hedda wants. Hedda wants to be the head of society. She knows that she can't remain unmarried forever and remain as popular. So she wants to marry a man that she's decent enough, and she wants to be popular, and she wants to be prosperous, and like all of these things. And her husband is not necessarily guaranteed the job that he wanted. So they may not be as wealthy. And also he has this aunt that she's like, so yes, she's not the most likable of characters. Meanwhile, Nora is so likable and her husband is a dick. So you kind of see the different ways that marriages can be unhappy. Both of them are focusing much more on the female characters, and I really appreciate that. And yeah, I really want to reread A Dollhouse. I read it 2 years ago and I was like, wow, this is great. Especially for a play that was written in 1879 by a man. It's just like, wow, this is a feminist play. So that was really lovely. And yeah, I want to talk about Mouse. So as I talked about earlier in the thing, I read all of this. This is the one that I own. And then I went to the library and I got the second one. So this is both of them together. So I just started about halfway through. I have about 50 pages left. I really enjoy the fact that it goes back and forth between him in this story as well as him talking to his father. And his father is not perfect. And then you even have him thinking about why he's telling this story and who has the story. And you know, very early on, like, his father spoils many of the stories. So it's not like you don't know that his older brother will die because he's an only child as he's raised. And he kind of talks about this later on, you know, how he was in competition with a snapshot because his brother didn't live. It's very poetic sometimes. Like, often when people disappear, his father says, like, and then we saw them no more, or then they complained no more. And we have an early on time in which someone offers to take Richelieu, who's their oldest son, and take him into hiding with a non-Jewish family, which is something we know that happened a lot, and they decide not to. And then there's like this line after that just says, I forget the people's names, but like it says they did not survive, but their son did, and we survived and our son did not. Like, you just see the ways in which one choice could have made a huge difference. And yeah, it's heartbreaking because you just see the ways, because it starts in 1933, 1934, somewhere in there, before he's even married, when he's just like a man around town, etc. And it really follows his life and the everyday moments, and then the slow infringement of those rights over and over and over and over again. And we meanwhile see this, and then we also see the ways in which the writer Art Spiegelman is tackling on them. There's a scene that is near the beginning of the second book that has him talking with his therapist, who happens to be Jewish as well and a survivor. You have them depicted as mice, which is why it's called Mouse. And there's a quote about how one Polish newspaper talked about how terrible Mickey Mouse is because they're vermin, and just like the Jews are vermin. And we have him as a human in this one moment, and he's wearing a mouse mask. And I thought that was such an evocative and interesting scene, because you have this, who he himself is Jewish. His parents had him, 3 years after the war. His parents went through this. But he's talking about how sometimes he feels guilty because how can he even talk about this because he didn't go through this. And the fact that you see him, like, all of them are depicted as mice except for a few scenes in which, like, he's talking about another comic or something like that. But everyone is an animal in this. And to see him as a human for a second with a mouse mask, I thought that was really evocative. Yeah, I'm going to finish this tomorrow on the last day of June, but I wanted to talk about it because I'm going to wrap it up tonight. But I was worried kind of going into this because I don't like black and white, kind of more simplistic kind of style. Like, that's not really the style of art. I like graphic novels a lot, but I've never liked black and white art. It's why I don't read a lot of manga. And then also just the more simplistic. I like the more realistic depictions, but this is really evocative. And like, I didn't even think about the fact that it was non-realistic. Like, it just wipes you into your mind and you're just so there. So I would really, really recommend this book. And it's a book that I put off for probably like 6 years when I was like, I know I'll get to it eventually, but I would not put it off if you have a chance. I'm assuming almost every library has it, or it has been banned, and we should go against this because if it's a book that has been banned. And like, the places in which there is nudity is the places in which it's showing Jewish men having to de-dress before they go into gas chambers. So the fact that it is a book that has been labeled pornography because of that is so disgusting, because like, there's nothing erotic about seeing men about to die, and it's showing the ways in which, not only did Germans want to keep their clothing and they were that stingy, but also just the dehumanization and like, making people be naked is a way to humiliate and also just, lesser people. And yeah. And there's one other scene in which it depicts his mother's suicide, which is something you find out on the second page. And there's a point in which she's in a bath, so you can see something. But like, it's not, again, these are not moments that are pornographic. So it's just really gross that people will try to censor this story that is a really important story that did not happen long ago. Like, my grandparents, who are still alive, lived through this. They lived through this in Canada, but like, they were children during this time. My grandfather, who is still alive, missed the war by a few months. He turned 18 in August of 1945, right when the war ended. So that's about Mouse. I think it's a book that should be read and discussed. And then before I finish, I want to do a little bit of a book haul. I have gotten behind on my book hauls. I meant to have that as a goal to keep on hand, but but I got some classics. Actually, before that, I took a video because I was in the thrift store and I saw this and I was like, wait, is this Charles Dickens? And I read it, and yeah, there was 3 little illustrations of Charles Dickens' illustrator, like, drawing them. It was David Copperfield and Oliver Twist, and another one I didn't recognize. They had the names, but I didn't know the names because I've only read 4 or 5 of Dickens books. So yeah, that was really cool. I almost got them. They were a little damaged and also like $4 each, and I was like, you know, I am poor, but I did get this for $4, which is beautiful. This is Monet's Woman with a Parasol. I knew it was Monet, but then I had to like reverse Google to find out which one it is. And I've always loved his style. It's really beautiful. I desire to have an art wall directly across from me where my bed is, but I have never put it up. But I have a few things, and this one is just really gorgeous, so I look forward to it. I love this style of painting so much. So $4 at a thrift store, it was really cool. So the first book that I picked up at the thrift store was Richard III, which I love. I have Richard II in the same edition, and I saw this at Stratford 2 years ago, like fall of 2022, and I love it. You know, it has the very famous, let me find the beginning. You know that it's a Shakespeare play when this much is before the first line. And it says, "Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by the son of York." Just so great. It wasn't my favorite performed play, but I was like, oh, so many famous lines, and just like, it made me want to talk about Anne, his wife, who's very misrepresented. And I like to write poems about Shakespearean plays and people, and like reimagining them, but also giving them more of a voice. One day, maybe my dream is that I will have a collection of Shakespearean poems, but who knows? I have a few about Anne because, yeah, I have a lot of feelings about Richard III as someone who has a disability, and mine is not necessarily as noticeable. It was really difficult to watch this play performed with an able-bodied person obviously doing a huge limp, and it was also an older man, which is almost always an older man, even though he died at like 32. There's just like this cult around making people old, making people disabled as evil, and there's whole conversations about this. It has so many good plays. I was like uncomfortable at some points. Also just his wife, that's the story, is that Anne and him, she was married to a man that she might not have even met when they were like 14. They were politically married, and then he died. And then she was married for like 13 years to like Richard, and they were really loving, and they had a child together that should have been the heir to the throne. And like, then his child died, and like, she died shortly after in like grief. Meanwhile, they portray this as like a much older man, and then her being like manipulated into this marriage. She was performed wonderfully by Jessica Hill. I've talked a lot about her in other Stratford plays because she's one of my favorite actors who performs there, and she did it impeccably. But I just was like, like, this is just so misrepresented. I like Anne and I have problems with Richard, but like, it is a play that I could definitely reread and have so many thoughts about, because I think I listened to an audio like a long time ago and I didn't really understand much of it, and then I watched it and I haven't reread it yet since. So I would love to do this, and yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts on Shakespeare and the controversy around this and representation. We found his body and we know that he had back problems, but we also know that he was a warrior, so his back problems were probably not noticeable in the same way. And also it's the way that it's presented, not that he has a disability. Like, I love people with disabilities represented. It's just the way that that is shown and often talked about in the play, and then the way that that is not given space in real representation, but it's a person taking that on. Whole conversation there, but yes, Richard III. This one, I don't remember a ton about it. I also read it really early, and it was Cousin Bet. And yeah, he is very well loved on BookTube by certain corners, and I loved this book. I didn't realize when I read it that I read an abridged audiobook, because I love libraries, but sometimes they don't tell you that they're abridged. So you just read them and then you're like, oh, yeah. And I was loving it, but I was also like, there were some confusing parts. And yeah, it's really funny. And it was one of the first classics that I read when I started BookTube. So I've always wanted to go back, but I didn't have access to a version of it. So I'm really glad to have it, whether I try to find a longer audio or I reread it physically, I'm not sure, but I want to hear the whole story. And then this book is a book that I just discovered a few weeks ago, I think, maybe a month ago, on my Libby, and I was like, oh, it's in the classics thing, and I gave a little more research, and then I found it at the thrift store for $2, which was just lovely. All of these were $2, and it's The Street by Ann Petrie. It is a book that came out in the 1940s. It's by a Black female writer, which I love seeing this. I'm just going to read the first line because I think that it's great. There was a cold November wind blowing over 116th Street. It rattled the tops of the garbage cans, sucked window shades out through the top open windows, and set them flapping back against the windows, and it drove most of the people off the street in the block between 7th and 8th Avenue. So you can just tell that she is a very evocative writer already. So yes, those were some of the books that I wanted to talk about before the end of this. I would love to hear your thoughts and your feelings about everything that I discussed, and thank you for coming along for this wonderful vlog.